Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clarke, joined by Chris Rifer. Been a few weeks since you've heard from us, but we're back, folks.
We're back.
We back, and we're on YouTube as well. I found that out
which was
today.
just revealed to me.
Yes.
So I would not say this is my YouTube get up.
Chris didn't get a chance to do the TV
I didn't
makeup.
put my face on this morning.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Nonetheless, I am here and I'm apparently on YouTube, which I think is probably my YouTube debut.
Yeah, it is for me too. I think I might be somewhere else on
Turns
YouTube.
out there's a lot of junk on here, to be honest. I'm not sure a YouTube debut is something you want to brag about. Tom Bogert has been doing some YouTube work, so that is our esteemed company. There's a lot of less esteemed company here on this platform.
Indeed, it's good to see the Valentine's Day banner above Chris Rifer's head here. The listeners on the podcast portion can't see it, but those of you on
Better
YouTube,
together.
Yeah, better together. Isn't that absolutely adorable?
Unlike the Timbers and Thorns.
Well, some would have argued they were better together, but yeah, that's the whole thing. So looks like you were on mute there for a second. So for whatever quip you may have made,
Really?
It fell on empty ears. So, but I just unmuted you, so it's okay.
I think that was your fault.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because on my end, I was live.
That's fine.
Honestly, probably for the best that you have some control over that.
Yeah, just to keep things orderly here. With that in mind, maybe we start talking with the Timbers here and sort of what's gone on with them over the last few weeks. Obviously, their season opener is next weekend at home against Colorado, so that's going to be a big moment. Phil Neville's coaching debut for the Timbers and a semi-new look roster, but really more tweaking having gone on than a full facelift. They're in preseason right now, obviously down in Coachella. They tied their first matchup with NYCFC and then lost their second matchup down there. And so that's been, unremarkable. I mean, the results don't matter and stuff like that, especially given how much substitution goes on. But plenty to talk about on the Timbers front, from the new kits, the Nature Unites ones, to Marvin Loria obviously having knee surgery and going to be out for a few months, adding to maybe some depth challenges for the Timbers at the winger spot. Santiago Moreno and Juan Mosquera signing extensions. Moreno through 2026 and Mosquera through 2027. There is apparently a DP striker signing that is close, according to reporting from our YouTube pal, Tom Bogert. But right now there's no name even really being floated. So, there has been talk, some of it maybe inflated at times, some of it just talk in general about the idea of them signing one or two big players prior to this season, and it's coming up close to the deadline of it being before the season here, right? And whoever they sign, DP striker or otherwise, not going to obviously be in town and ready to roll for next week. That's just an unrealistic expectation. So it'll be someone that gets into the fold maybe a couple games into the season at best, but we don't have a name to speculate about right now. And so with all that in mind, where is your head at? Where are the vibes at ahead of this season opener for the Timbers?
I think they're better than they were last year. That's not the highest bar in the world, but I think they're better than they were last year. I think the signings of Miller and Crépeau were both very good. I think the Miller trade was a good trade, and the Crépeau signing, frankly, was a coup. I mean, that wasn't a signing that I expected the Timbers to be able to make. And so those are certainly helpful. And the defense was a problem, right? And those should be quite helpful. They have, for the first time in a while, I think, some pretty good depth at center back now, where they've got, certainly since they've kept Dario Zubric, which is a little bit of a surprise from where things started at the beginning of the offseason. They've got Zubric, they've got McGraw, they've got Miller, they've got Miguel Araujo, who remains a little bit of a wild card. It seems like he's kind of in that fourth spot right now, which is a disappointment, I think, given what they had hoped from him, at least coming in, that he would be a starting level contributor. He hasn't sort of worked his way into that spot yet, but he may yet. So, I think that is better than it was last year. And frankly, between that and the goalkeeping improvements, I think overall it's a better roster even in this moment than it was last year. But I wouldn't say they're significantly better, right? I think you look at that attack in general and you hope for maybe a little bit of internal improvement, but otherwise it's virtually unchanged from last year in an attack that I think was pretty inconsistent. It had some good stretches, but it also had some pretty bleak stretches. And in particular, I worry, and I think this worry might even survive the signing of a DP number 9, that one of the big problems in the attack last year was that they had a tendency in the final third to be both very narrow and very static. And that's because the attack is loaded with players who want to play within the width of the penalty area, and who also would prefer to have the ball at their feet rather than be the one doing moving off the ball. And I think that issue remains, maybe is even a little bit worse now than it was then, right? I mean, Santiago Moreno, Eric Williams, and Evander, these are all guys who want to operate with the ball at their feet. And as of this moment, I mean, it looks like that's sort of the creative engine of the attack, along with Felipe Mora. I think Anthony might help that. And I think that's part of the hope, but that's probably an unreasonable hope to put on still a relatively young player. But I think that's the best hope.
Yeah, I think he's probably the most suited to sort of solve or help solve those problems. He's not going to solve them by himself, but but he's the most suited, I think, to play in the wide positions. And yeah, I mean, Moreno has even floated in the media about the desire to play in more of an attacking midfield role as more of a number 10 type of person for them.
And even when he's playing out on the wing, he likes to start wide, sort of in the middle third, to take that up as a starting position, because it's a really good spot for him to be able to pick up the ball and then do what he wants to do, which is drive toward goal. But he starts wide and plays in, right? That is his normal, most natural pattern of play. He's not somebody who in the final third is going to be, to use an Englishism, get some chalk on the boots. He's not going to be that kind of guy. And they've got Juan Mosquera on that side who certainly provides some of that. But frankly, even in the final third, he actually tends to want to come inside as well. And had some success doing that in 2023. And frankly, I mean, clearly his presence by itself wasn't enough to solve this problem, because he was there, right? And he sort of opened the season strong and faded as the season went along, to the point where his spot wasn't even super secure by the end of the year, where he was at least periodically through the summer being omitted in favor of Eric Miller at right back. And so I think so I still worry about that, frankly, in the attack. And I'm not super confident that a DP number 9, even a good one, would solve that problem. And the reason it's a problem is, even if you have good players, if your personnel just wants to attack sort of within the width of the penalty area, then you're going to have to find some way to create space. Because if you're narrow like that, you're just not hard to defend with 4 or 5 guys.
Can that come from a situation that I've seen others float online? Alex Barnes, our good pal over at Stumptown Footy, and you talked a little bit about this, I believe, on Twitter. The idea of having 3 in the back with McGraw, Miller, that's Kamal Miller, and Zuperich, and then sort of going with Mosquera and question mark as the wing backs, because Claudio Bravo's injured for a while.
Question mark is the first question mark.
Yeah. So, that's the thing. Like, you can play that way. You can try to make it work that way. And I think that a guy like Mosquera is probably more suited to a wing back type of position than he is just a straight up, outside back. His defending, I think, gives a little more way to his offensive and attacking ability. But the question is, like, who's going to be that person? It's probably not going to be somebody like Eric Miller, right? That's not sort of his type of forte.
In a pinch, maybe. As a preferred setup, absolutely not.
Sure. But yeah, no. And, obviously their preference would be Bravo in that situation. But again,
it's going to be a few months.
It's going to be a few months. And you're going to have to start the season out with somebody sort of, sliding into that role. It's a big question mark. And there have been rumors floated about different players at that position that they have potentially expressed interest in. We haven't seen anything super concrete in the way of reporting from people like Tom Bogert and others, but yeah, that's other than how the DP number 9 is going to fit into everything, whether he plays alongside Felipe Mora up top, or if there's an opportunity for Mora to come off of the bench, which I don't know, given his form, particularly toward the end of last season, I don't know if that's the best move for them to relegate one of their more talented attacking players to the bench in that situation. But there's going to be the adjustment period for whoever this guy is that they bring in. If it's a major signing, if it's like, I mean, there isn't even a name I could think of, but it'd be a different story.
They've been hinting at a major signing, right? There's no ambiguity to Phil Neville's top DP.
Yeah.
That is the expectation. If it's not a top DP, people are going to have rightful cause to
question that. Yeah.
And yeah, exactly.
And Phil said that there's a major commitment in terms of money from ownership from Merritt Paulson on this. We'll see how that plays out. If it's a bigger money signing than Evander, which is what it seems like it's tracking towards, given the position, given the talk and the hype, that's a BFD, and that's going to change things for sure. But it doesn't shore up, I think, what is the most glaring issue, which is how you sort of fill in for Bravo and then have depth behind both Bravo and Mosquera that you feel really comfortable with, so that you're not, having a red light flashing in one area of the field that could cause everything to sort of like collapse around it. If you're in a situation in a game where, it could break open. Yeah. There's so many different factors at play with this roster that are going to be tested in these first few weeks, in these first few games. But that's the major one that I think people are going to have their eye on, and how Phil Neville tactically tries to cover for that is going to be interesting to watch, I think, as well.
Now, when it comes to questions about sort of using a 3-back as a primary system, first of all, I think it's well worth exploring. So, I don't mean to totally rain on the parade at all. I think it's well worth exploring, especially in this period in which they don't have Claudio Bravo. I think it's a good idea to play with it. Clearly, Neville has been they have played it some, they have not. They've also played in the 4 some. We know that. I mean, we've only sort of had actual eyes on one game, but we've seen the lineups from the others, and we can sort of infer the general setup. So they've played in both. I mean, with respect to the 3, I think, there are obvious questions about what they do at left wing back right now that you noted. The other question that just is always in my head, frankly, when we're talking about any sort of a 3 setup, is where does Santiago Moreno play? And I don't think there's a super clear answer to that, because I think if you move him to the spot that makes the most sense in that, as sort of like the most advanced central midfielder, which frankly isn't a role we've seen him in a ton. We saw a little bit of it last year, and it was like okay to good, not amazing. But if you move him there, then where are you moving Evander? Are you moving him back? And then do you have enough defense if it's Chara, Evander, and Moreno? I think you don't. you're going to get overrun. Do you move him up as sort of the second forward alongside the number 9? Well, he really didn't do well in that role last year. He was a guy who did much better when he had more freedom to play deeper. He's not a second forward. Like, he's just not. And so, I mean, maybe he could grow into that role, but I think one of the just like rules of soccer coaching is put your best players in their best positions, in their natural positions. Like, don't move Evander into a position where you think he can work. Maybe you put Evander where Evander fits, and Evander fits as your most advanced central midfielder, not as a second.
You change
forward.
things around him, not the other way around.
That's exactly right.
Because you want him to be able to thrive so that he can be that type of engine that I think he's capable of being, and that he showed major flashes of during stretches of last season. Like, you want him to thrive. You want obviously the DP number 9 to thrive. We'll see if that number 9 too is somebody that is versatile and can maybe play as a winger.
But again, I mean, it's kind of the similar thing. If you're going to pay $10 million for a guy, play him in his position. Like put him in his position. Don't be like, hey, this guy's played some on the wing, so maybe we can make that work. No, you're paying $10 million for a guy. Put him in his position. This isn't hard. This is like the basic stuff. And so, I think whenever you think about this roster and you think about how they're going to work in a 3-back, it starts to get, to borrow from old friend John Spencer, a little square peggy and round holy, right? The other thing that I think has been interesting and that has been on my mind and that has been actually kind of interesting in these lineups, because the choice that Neville is making is a little bit counterintuitive to me, is the positional battle between Eric Williamson and Christian Paredes. Obviously Williamson got hurt last year, so he was out for an extended period of time. Paredes was one of the few guys on the roster who had an unambiguously good season in 2023. I think Supporters Player of the Year.
Yes.
If I'm remembering right. You remember these things a lot better because you like deal with actual facts. I just like,
sure.
As a journalist,
you're just vibing. Yeah.
I'm just vibing over here. Just vibing. I believe my caption on YouTube is soccer enthusiast. And I just want to say for the powers that be who make such decisions, I wholeheartedly endorse that. But yeah, I'm just vibing over here, so I don't remember things like that.
Sure.
But I mean, unambiguously one of the Timbers' best players last year, and it looks like Neville is preferring Williamson over Paredes. Now, the reason why I think Paredes fits and just fits within this whole setup as sort of the true 8 in whatever midfield they put together, in whatever central midfield unit they have together, I think Paredes fits as the true 8, is because he is by far the more two-way player as between them. And frankly, with Diego Chara getting on an age, I just don't think there's enough defense in front of him if Eric Williamson is sort of the second player, the true 8 in that central midfield setup. Now, I think a lot of Eric Williamson as a player. Frankly, I mean, if the roster was built such that Williamson was the more advanced 8 or 10 in their central midfield setup, I would be pretty happy, but that obviously creates problems with Evander. This just gets back to my now year-long sort of like head scratch of like, are Williamson and Evander redundant? and I worry that the answer, I mean, here I am a year later, and I'm not convinced that the answer to that is no. But in any event, it looks, at least so far, like Neville is going with Williamson over Paredes in that 8 role, which I think is interesting. I mean, either he's going to find a way to make that work, and that's going to be pretty smart, or this is a very really reductive statement, or he's not going to find a way to make it work, and we're going to be sitting here in a few weeks being like, wow, Doofus coach didn't watch the past, did he? And tried something that has already been tried and has already failed, and here we go again.
It's the only 2 options, right? It's either not going to work or it'll work.
It's either not going to work or it's going to work. And if it works, he's going to look smart. If it doesn't, he's going to look dumb. But I mean, the point is that has been tried in the past, and like there's in addition to Williamson's injuries, like there's kind of a reason why it never really hit with Williamson and Evander on the field at the same time last year. And I mean, I and why there were problems. And so, going back to that is an interesting choice.
Yeah,
Neville thinks he can do better than Gio did with it. Cool. Let's see if he can. But if he doesn't, there are going to be questions.
Yeah, I think there are ways to potentially make it work if things fall your way, right? If Moreno becomes more comfortable in a wide position and can just be an out and out winger for them that sometimes drifts in if need be, just to make himself more comfortable or set other people up. I mean, it's there are complicated things that are over my head that somebody like Phil Neville or in the past Gio Savarese and coaches with decades of experience in this sport know maybe the little tweaks that maybe you and I aren't necessarily discussing or are familiar with. But by that same token, like it's a two-pronged thing. It also has to be Evander that in that situation feels more comfortable being an out and out number 10. And I just, as you pointed out, I don't know if that's the best usage of his ability, because there were times I think last year where he left some to be desired on the defensive end. And he's,
I mean, I don't think you want Evander,
and stuff, but I do think that when he drops a little deeper, he's more successful is more the point.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I don't think you want to put much in terms of defensive responsibilities on Evander, because you want him to have the freedom. I mean, one of the things about defensive responsibilities, especially in a central midfielder, is essentially what you're telling them is, yes, do stuff in the attack, but also you need to be mindful of where you go so that you're in a position to repress if and when we lose the ball, right? And so that's like kind of the thing. If you're giving somebody in central midfield defensive responsibilities, you're like, yeah, I mean, go find the game, but like don't stray too far. You want Evander to be free. You want Evander to not be worrying about whether he's in a position to counterpress or anything like that when he's going to find the pockets of space that are going to be available, because they're always going to be different, right? Those pockets of space are going to be different every week, depending on which opponent you're facing, which personnel they're rolling out, what their tactical approach to the game is. And you want Evander to have just total liberty to hunt those spaces, to find them. Diego Valeri would just do this like genius level when he was when he was sort of in his prime, where he would just hunt whatever the spaces were, and sometimes it'd be out wide, right? Think about some of the like amazing moments that we've seen from Diego Valeri in his day, where he started way out wide, or where he would be picking up the ball way out wide. It's like he's the number 10, or even the second forward, if we fast forward to 2017, and yet here he is picking up the ball, 40 yards, 50 yards deep, and way out on the left wing or the right wing. It's because he was hunting that space. And because he didn't have much in terms of defensive responsibilities, he could have just total liberty to go find it. That's where you want Evander. That's what you want him to be able to do. And a lot of times that space is going to be deeper. Frankly, teams are just setting up in ways where that's just the case now, right? I mean, ever since the advent of the popularity of the double pivot in, the 2000s, that has and sort of the modifications and the growth of that we've seen over the course of the last 15 years or so, like teams are good at shutting down spaces. Teams are good at shutting down zone 14. And so that's why you've just needed to have these primary playmakers who are able to be more creative in terms of where they're picking up the ball, because they can't rely on getting the ball 25 yards out from goal in the middle of the field anymore.
Right. And we're talking about playmakers, and it just makes me think of how important, and you mentioned Christian Paredes last year and how good he was, how important he often was in sort of playmaking situations, right?
And he's
like he
good
may not
at doing
have
it without the ball at his feet.
Assists. Yeah, exactly. He fills those spaces, he attacks those spaces in a really, impressive way. And so that's a big question, right? Williamson is obviously somebody that I think needs to see the field with regularity, because he's one of the more talented players on the roster. The question is,
I'm a big Eric Williamson fan. None of this is a criticism of Eric Williamson.
And so the challenge then is like, are you splitting starts with Williamson and Paredes to make sure Paredes is on the field more? Or, and this is a major question to ask, are you thinking about, scaling it back with Chara at all? Because last year, there was very little evidence to suggest that Diego had taken much, if any, steps back in terms of his contribution, his fitness, his ability to do what he does and just be a disruptor and be the legendary player that in MLS that he's been. But eventually, if it is beneficial to the team, you might have to kill a sacred cow, right? You might have to say, look, we're scaling it back with Chara and giving Paredes, who's younger and does some of the same things, but is more of an attacking presence and is more versatile. Give him more of that sort of opportunity. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily right off the bat. It would, I think, depend on the form you're seeing out of a Diego Chara, but it is a complication nonetheless. And it's the layers of complication that exist because Evander is up top, which means Santi's not up top. And because Evander's up top, that means he's not deeper, which means Williamson is a little deeper, which means Paredes doesn't really fit into the 11 in most formations. So
or Williamson doesn't if you're going to put Paredes in instead of Eric.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just a complication that's extremely normal for
if the question
a soccer
is,
team. But yeah,
is there a possibility that sort of Diego Chara takes a step back? I think if the Timbers are playing in a 4, the answer is no, because he really is the only true 6, other than perhaps David Ayala, who had like 15 minutes of really good play in 2023 before like the most tragic injury of the season.
Yeah, and where does he fit in? That's another player.
And I think he fits in as the backup number 6, and whether he is going to be in a place where he's going to be pushing for minutes, I think just remains to be seen. We will see. I think we were in the process of seeing whether that was going to be the case last year, and sadly he just got hurt, and so we were deprived of that opportunity. But the question being whether they can sort of move Paredes, who I do not regard as a 6, who I regard as a true out and out 8, into sort of the deepest role in their central midfield, I think boils down to whether they're playing in a 4 or a 3. If you're playing in a 4 back, this is a little bit counterintuitive just with the numbers, but it's because of how the fullbacks work. I think the answer is no. You need a real 6 if you're playing in a 4. We've seen it over and over and over again. You need a real 6 if you're playing in a 4, because if you don't have a real 6 and you're playing in a 4, then those number 10s are often just going to be able to pick up the ball in the middle of the field 30 yards from goal, and I mean that the result is pain. It's bad. So I think if you're playing in a 4, the answer is no. If you're playing in a 3, there might be a little bit of a different calculus, because oftentimes if you're playing in a 3, what you'll do in your sort of non-deep defense, a lot of times one of your center backs is going to step out a little bit, and in extreme cases they can even almost take up the position of a 6 in possession and also in transition moments, because you have those 2 center backs sitting behind them to provide that cover, and so you can have a little bit of verticality in the positioning of your center backs if you're playing in a 3. In that instance, teams can get away in their central midfield without having like anybody who's a true real 6, because you can essentially fill that role in moments that you need to with a center back. It's tactically pretty nuanced to get it done. It takes the right folks, but frankly, I think the Timbers have 3 center backs, all of whom have pretty good heads on their shoulders. And so could they figure that out? Yeah, I do think so. I'm not sure. I mean, you generally want that to be your central center back. And you usually also want that person to be somebody who's pretty good in possession. Kamal Miller is the best by far of those 3 with the ball at their feet, because you're going to want to play through that guy with some regularity in possession, right? As you do your 6. I think Miller is the best with the ball at his feet, but he also is the most natural fit as the left center back. So, I mean, that would be something to work out. But if they're playing in a 3, then I think that becomes more of a conversation. If they're playing in a 4, I think it would just take a to this point unforeseen or unseen evolution from somebody like Christian Paredes to be truly a 6, which I just don't think he is. But I think he's a really good 8, and I think he's a really good 8 who should be part of the starting lineup.
The nature
at Phil.
The Nature Unites jerseys. Nature United. Nature Unites.
Nature.
That's what the Timbers can call themselves now.
Yeah, I mean, like the Squirrels and the Bears and all that didn't get together and put together a soccer team that is Nature United.
Yeah,
it is Nature Unites.
Yes. So what are your what's the take?
I'm waiting to see them live in living color, and I say in living color somewhat intentionally because like the color on some of the photos is weird. They almost look teal or bluish. And that's weird. Given that like it's supposed to be like tree branches.
Yeah,
I've
Alex
heard that
Barnes,
live they look greener than they do in the photos.
Yeah, Alex said that.
That's the only like big note that I have. I think it's kind of a cool concept. It's certainly preferable to just the like, hey, we have a white shirt as our secondary kind of deal that so many MLS teams have done over the years. And so I'm glad that they got a little bit creative. I like the hat tip, at least to the Nature Conservancy. I think that's a cool deal. So yeah, I mean, overall positive, and if they're not blue, even better.
Yeah, and I don't think that they are. We didn't get them shipped to us. Other people did. That's okay. But
I in all my years, I have yet to like get the free like jersey box thing. It's all right.
And I can't accept that stuff. So
that's right. You have ethics. I'm just not cool enough. Alex though is.
Alex is cool enough. Fook's cool enough. Fook win. Shout out to Fook. They both got some nice jerseys. I liked how they packaged them too. There's like wood shavings in the box too. I think that the vibe was very cool. And so I like the jersey. I think that it's a solid look. Central crests, I'm not like a huge
I mean
fan of.
The stacked logo business. It's clearly an Adidas thing. We see it on Miami's. My guess is we'll see it on one or two others at least.
Yeah.
Not a great idea. I mean, obviously Nike sort of started us down this path with the U.S. men's national team jersey and a few others at the last World Cup. I'm looking forward to when the various manufacturers depart this path because I don't think it's a good one.
Yeah, the shorts are plain sort of cream colored too, and that's an interesting piece for me. I think it kind of would have been cool if the tree thing like went down all the way like on the side of the shorts too. I don't think they can do that though. I think that the shorts have to be a solid color as part of the deal. But at any rate, I think the design is pretty cool, and I like the photo shoot that Craig Mitchell-Dyer and company did with Char and Williamson. I think that it was a
did
cool
that look
little
like it was Forest Park.
It
it's hard to say, but that would be the most natural thing for them to do, right? I mean, it's kind of out the back door.
Yeah.
Go find a good spot in Forest Park. But yeah, it's cool. I generally positive. Weird filters / way the color shows up in some of the photography. That makes it look very blue.
Sure.
Which is neither the color of trees nor the timbers.
Right. So moving on maybe from the Timbers, from jerseys to the Portland Thorns here. A little more activity in the recent weeks than we had seen. Obviously, last podcast we talked about the rumored signing of Jesse Fleming for a record fee. That record has now been eclipsed, as we've noted.
Short-lived record.
Yeah, Bay FC eclipsed that record significantly with their signing. But either way, big money, most money ever spent on a Thorns signing for Jesse Fleming. That was made official in the time since our last podcast. The Canadian Thorns takeover continues. She's somebody that I think slots in well alongside Sam Coffey in the midfield. Obviously, Rocky Rodriguez, as we noted last podcast, headed down to Angel City. So that's sort of the swap they do there. And I think Fleming is somebody that could be one of their best players next season. Other than that, Marie Muller was signed, a German defender from Freiburg in the Frauen Bundesliga. She came to the Thorns in sort of an interesting like framing of a signing, right? Because she's somebody that played primarily outside back, but based on what I think Mike Norris's quote hinted at, they see her as somebody that has the same type of versatility as maybe a Rana Reyes, right? That can get up and be a winger or a wing back type of player with that type of wide ability. So she could factor in either into the starting lineup in the case of maybe Klingenberg moving to the bench, or as somebody that splits time relatively evenly with somebody like Klingenberg throughout the season. I'm interested to see how they utilize her. I think that was a strong signing for the Thorns and Karina LeBlanc. But other than that, there are certainly questions, I think, about the depth that this Thorns team has behind its obviously extremely talented starting 11.
Yeah.
Then compared with the rest of NWSL, right? Because there are teams like Gotham who have stacked themselves up with talent and veteran experience in ways that maybe if you compare the Thorns to them is not necessarily the case. I do think that this Thorns team as constructed is a championship contender. The question is, when it comes down to postseason time, all the chips falling as they could for the Thorns, if they stay healthy and aren't having to test that depth as much as they probably will have to. What happens in those games against a Gotham, against San Diego? That I mean, can they make it farther than they did last year with a team that I think was more well-rounded overall?
Yeah, this Thorns team is a team that looks really good on a preseason projected 11 sheet. It's not hard to come up with a good-looking starting 11 for the Thorns. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just not hard. I think some fair questions still to ask about whether the back line altogether is, sort of an elite unit, but it certainly is at least workable. And then everything in front of it is far better than workable. Oh, the question 100% is depth. I mean, 100% is just depth. And it's basically at every position. There is not sort of like, we are sorted too deep at any position on the field. And that's the concern. It's especially a concern in an Olympic year, when you're going to have a good number of players headed off to the Olympics and who are not going to miss a ton of games because the league has gotten smarter about that as they've gone, but we'll certainly miss some. And then the question is, what kind of form and health will they be in when they get back from the Olympics, which, as we found out last year and in years past, is definitely a question.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's the double-edged sword of having these like incredible like national team level players on your team that are also going to disappear, and what do you have behind them that can keep the form rolling during that time period? And last season it was hard. I mean, there was definitely.
I mean, Crystal Dunn was a different player before and after the World Cup last year.
Yeah, she was.
I mean, enormously so.
Yeah, and there's questions about health already for the Thorns this season too, with Gabby Provenzano tore her Achilles. Obviously, wishing her a prosperous and speedy recovery. Achilles recoveries are never speedy, but it's
really rough.
That's a rough one, and that already is somebody that you were hoping maybe stepped into a greater role than she had last year, and now she's not there. There's still obviously time until the season starts for them to maybe bring in another player or two that can alleviate some of those challenges, but otherwise, yeah, depth is a genuine question.
Yeah, I mean, the but on that is, I mean, the damage in many respects has been done, right? Because in terms of there were some players in the free agency class this year who would have helped fill out an 11. There were a ton of players in NWSL free agency this year who can fill out your 18, right? And that is where I think the Thorns really missed the boat in the early parts of the offseason. And we've talked about, some of the various factors that we can speculate about why, et cetera, yada, 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 for, we've talked about that all offseason. But I mean, that's I think where the damage to the roster build is done. And I don't see a ton of opportunities to bring in the numbers that they need to be able to do that. Yes, they have some players still remaining on the roster who can be helpful in terms of depth. Certainly, I think they hope Izzy D'Aquila is ready to sort of step into a little bit bigger role this year. Taylor Porter remains somebody who can provide depth in central midfield. I mean, obviously, Christine Sinclair is going to be in the 18, and they have between Mueller and Klingenberg, I think one pretty figures to be decent fullback in depth, but it's just really thin. I mean, they need 3 or 4 additional players to be able to step in and fill out those 18s and frankly fill out 11s when you have the inevitable, I mean, because everybody always has them, injuries. And I mean, it's just the kind of roster that you can see if they have a little bit of a rash of injuries, them sort of ruining the fact midseason about how bad of luck that they've had with injuries. But really, it's not about luck. It's about the roster not being constructed to handle those things that just come along. It's sports, right? It's athletics. People get hurt. People get injured. That's the fact of life. And they're very, very exposed to being hurt very badly by those things right now. And so that's what concerns me. The 11, very few notes. I think it looks really dang good. And I think your description of it as championship caliber is spot on. If by some grace of God, they're able to be consistently healthy and consistently in form and have everybody available, yeah, I think this is the team that can win a title. But that's a pretty unreasonable expectation to have here, even in the middle of February.
Yeah, and I'm interested too to see how, if at all, that is alleviated in the coming weeks and months, because it obviously all doesn't have to happen right now necessarily. It would be made easier if it happened right now, but there are windows throughout the season during which you can bolster your depth and bring players in. It happens in every league. It's just part of the deal. Soccer is not bring everybody together before the season and this is who you're rolling with the whole way.
It's true.
If you're doing that, maybe you're not having as successful of a season. But
it's true. But the counterpoint is there's danger in trying to build the plane too much mid-flight, as we've seen from the Timbers the last few years.
Yeah, the Timbers had that problem last year,
and maybe you're kind of having the problem again this year. But I mean, there's danger in that as well. I think if what you're trying to do during the season is make one addition here or one addition there to bring a particular attribute to the team or to provide a spot of cover, I think that's one thing. If you sort of have an across the board depth issue heading into the season, I think that's far more concerning from a roster construction perspective.
For sure. Somebody that is really important to what they're going to do in that starting lineup that's going to step into that bigger role this year, obviously, is Olivia Moultrie. Now, an ML or an NWSL veteran at 18 years old.
Yeah.
She just re-signed with the Thorns for 3 more years. Obviously, that's a big one to check off the list, because she's somebody that I'm sure, had she become a free agent or had the ability to go wherever she wants, she'd have attention from around NWSL and beyond it. So that's a big one for Karina LeBlanc to lock down there. And somebody who this season can step in as like an out and out number 10 and be a phenomenal playmaker right behind the likes of Sophia Smith and Morgan Weaver and Hina Sugita. I mean, that quartet right there, with Moultrie starting to come into her own and enter perhaps the early stages of her prime as a player, given the amount of years she's put in as a pro already. That's scary. And it's always going to be scary, right? Soph's up top, man. It's
I mean, that's the question.
Yeah. So it's going to, but the rest of it and the depth obviously is the additional question, because yes, like Sauerbrunn is coming back. That's awesome. Klingenberg is coming back. That's awesome. Those are 2 people that, beyond their contribution on the field, are veteran leaders that, their presence is invaluable. We've talked about that at length. Hubley at center back, she wasn't really rated as much by Mike Norris last year, as I think you pointed out on the last podcast. So that those 2 paired up, Sauerbrunn and Hubley, are going to be relied upon pretty heavily. but they've added depth in the defender position, so that's maybe going to help. We'll see how those players come on. Obviously, both of them are young that they're bringing in, but Reina Reyes, I think, is somebody to be excited about as well. Probably slotted in as more of a left wing back this year, but I think she's an out and out starter and somebody that showed flashes of serious quality last season, and
now getting regular calls into
her.
the Mexican national team.
Yep, and that's big. And so her continuing to get that experience and then getting more regular run with the starting lineup this year is going to be exciting too. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, it's going to be interesting how that depth is rounded out. The goalkeeper position is interesting too, because obviously Bella Bixby won't be there this year. And again, congrats to her. I mean, that's going to be awesome to become a mom. And she's got so many people on that team in the way that Crystal Dunn did, supporting her and just sort of being like the aunties for the baby. I mean, that's going to be so cool. But yeah, that's Shelby Hogan's going to start there. And I think she was strong in the time that she played during last season, but
it's a position of question. And it's also a position of question because the through line that we've had in Thorns goalkeepers over the course of the last few years has always been Nadine Unger. And the outstanding coaching that they've had from Unger. Nadine is gone. That could end up being a really big loss this year. Frankly, as I talk to folks who are more plugged into this than I am, that's the one that comes up more than any in terms of losses from 2023 to 2024 that could affect the Thorns season. Nadine Unger is a really good goalkeeping coach. There's a reason that every single goalkeeper that she coached got better. From Michelle Betos to A.D. French to Bella Bixby. I mean, there's a reason that this has been a goalkeeping factory for the last several years. And it doesn't take a genius to infer that reason was Nadine Unger. And so I think that's a big position of, frankly, just question coming into the year that, I mean, if things go south, that could be one of the reasons why. I also think it's worth pausing, though, to come back to Liv Moultrie, earning her sort of second true out-and-out pro NWSL contract. There's been whisper discussion about Liv because she was signed so early in her life. I was about to say career, but like life.
Yeah.
About whether, she was sort of worth the hype. Answer. Yes. Really good player, it turns out. It is not a small thing to sort of earn that second big contract to get to this point. And I think at this point, and she's not being signed because of any hype. She's not being signed because of anything like that. She's being signed to this extension, and one can infer getting a nice pay raise because she's proven it. She's shown it. And I think that answers an awful lot of questions. And so she's not only a pioneer in women's soccer, but she's also a person who's just frankly earned it on her own merits as a player, period.
Yeah.
And so congratulations to her. Well earned. The opportunity that she has this year that you talked about is also well earned. She's getting that opportunity because she deserves it. And now it's sort of her opportunity to really take it by the horns and become sort of a full national team player. But boy, if you're talking about at the age of 18, working your way into that kind of position, full credit. And she's exceptionally, unbelievably mature. That's the reason why everybody always forgets she's 18 years old, because when you hear her speak, she doesn't come off that way, even in the slightest. And she plays really, really mature. She doesn't play like an 18-year-old. So well earned for her. I very, very much look forward to seeing how Sam Coffey, and Jessie Fleming work out the balance in that central midfield. I think if they can work it out with Mike Norris and under his guidance, that really has a lot of potential to be a very, very exciting unit. And when you look at the ages around that unit, could be a very exciting unit for a long time for the Portland Thorns, and frankly can be the backbone of a really good team.
Yeah.
If you can lock down those kinds of players and those kinds of relationships in a positional unit like that, that's the kind of stuff that makes for lasting success. And so that's the opportunity that they have this year to go start laying that foundation.
Yeah, that foundation is huge. That being potentially the best midfield in NWSL, right? Is and for years to come, because we've talked a lot about the importance of the SOF extension, and obviously that's going to continue to be a discussion point.
It's the Shohei Ohtani free agency of the NWSL, yes. Right? I mean, to make a stupid baseball reference, but like the Shohei Ohtani free agency was like the biggest free agency in the MLB for like decades.
Yeah, but the coffee one is close to as important, right? Because you're talking about locking up that midfield for the long term. Fleming and Moultrie are taken care of.
Yeah,
the transfer keeps Fleming here through I believe 2027 or so.
Yeah,
in that range. And
Coffee's 2025, right?
Yeah,
if I'm remembering right. Yeah. I think there's an option for next year. But nonetheless, this is when those conversations should be starting about extending that relationship.
Yeah, and so those players can be foundational, and they're bringing in young players at other positions that can sort of ease into the spots of veterans as they go out. Obviously, Moultrie slots into where Christine Sinclair had been, and that's the easy transition there. Obaze obviously seems like the heir to Sauerbrunn, not not in the way that like she's expected to be Becky Sauerbrunn, but I mean in terms of like
the roster construction,
roster construction, and the planning out for potentially this being Becky's last year. We don't know yet if that's the case, but it could be. And then Klingenberg obviously on the outside with Mueller, and then Reyes on the other side, just sort of being those two type of players to fit in there. They have those contingency plans, but the question is immediate depth and contribution, as we talked about. And so, I building out a team for the future that can continue to contend regardless of if maybe they lose a player to another team that gets a big contract or a big transfer fee. You think about all the moving parts with the Thorns, right? Like Sugita seems like somebody that they want to keep around for the long haul. Everybody in this town loves Morgan Weaver, but there are, I'm sure, teams lining up asking Karina LeBlanc how much money it would take to make Weaver their version of Sophia Smith, like to make her their star player, right? Because alongside Smith, they're lethal, but there is potential for somebody like a Morgan Weaver to be a star player for another team. There is potential for maybe a Reina Reyes or a Sam Coffey down the line to become like a central figure for another team. So keeping those things intact, like you said, it's huge.
So we actually had a question that I'm gonna pull up out of the question section, which is next, into this section because it's topical. Which is, and I can't remember who asked this. You're the person who actually does this stuff. But somebody asked, what does a successful year look like for the Portland Thorns? And the purpose of the question sort of being, what's the on-field expectation? They're going to win a championship, make the playoffs, kind of stuff. A successful year for the Portland Thorns looks like extending Sophia Smith or re-signing Sophia Smith. And I'll put it to you this way, Ryan, and you can answer. And in terms of this thought experiment, what would you rather have happen? What would be a better year for the Thorns? They go to and lose the NWSL championship game, but they do not re-sign Sophia Smith. Or they have injuries, absences, kind of a rough going year. They miss the playoffs, but they re-sign Sophia Smith. Which one would you choose? I don't even have to think about this.
Oh no, it's re-signing Sophia because
no question.
Those two scenarios that you're talking about, like neither of them include a championship, right? And maybe in the one where they make it to the championship and lose, or they also get a shield. The championship.
Would you rather win the NWSL championship this year or re-sign Sophia Smith?
I mean, the potential for more is obviously the thing that you want, but it's so hard to win a championship to say, oh no, I'd rather have her than the championship. As if you're a fan, like that's an interesting bargain to make. This isn't a choice that is actually going to exist, but it is an interesting hypothetical. Obviously it's Soph to me, because you every year that you have her on your roster, regardless of what's around her, I mean, it matters.
Especially if you've got that central midfield foundation behind her, you're a contender.
Yeah, you are. And it does matter what's around her. It's not like you just put her with a ragtag group and suddenly they're going to win the title. That's not how this sport works. But the team that they've been able to build and the foundation they've been able to build around her is strong enough that every year that you have her around, she's a championship winning player in one of the best in the world. So, yes, her.
So, yeah, I mean, a successful year for the Thorns looks like re-signing Sophia Smith for me.
Yeah. And we've harped on this, at length, but it's important.
It's the biggest story in NWSL this year. And, I raised the point because, look, I mean, the Thorns do have Smith in a contract year this year. They have Sam Coffey and Morgan Weaver in a contract year next year. And to your point, I mean, look, there are a lot of NWSL teams right now that are looking at those 3 contracts and salivating. I mean, if we get toward the end of the year and there's not a contract extension for Smith, it is going to be a major story about how teams are lining up to make their pitches to Soph. She can start negotiating with them in September, I think, after the roster freeze deadline. And that's going to be it's going to be hot.
Yeah.
And not in a comfortable way, and hot under the collar for the Thorns.
Yeah.
Because guess who's not feeling great about the Shohei Ohtani free agency right now? The Angels. They're not feeling good about it at all. And that's the seat that the Thorns are going to be sitting in.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's the seat that the Thorns are going to be sitting in with respect to Weaver and Coffey too, if they're not able to sort of lock down that group. And so, I mean, I think those are the bigger stories, frankly, and the more important benchmarks for a successful 2024 than the actual outcome of the year for the Thorns this year. Because that's going to be what dictates what happens for this club for the next half decade.
Yeah. And that question was asked about both teams from our listener.
The Timbers?
Yeah. So what does this what does a successful season look like for the Timbers? I mean, are we talking about like a genuine major step forward? I think that's what it is. I think it's a genuine major step forward. You're a top 4 team in the West. You make a solid playoff run. That to me seems like the type of step that they envisioned when they brought in Phil Neville, that they wanted to take. But I mean, that's everybody's desire, right? The question is how it plays out.
Top 4 in the conference, I think, is the reasonable benchmark of a successful year. And I think the regular season standings are more important than the playoffs in that regard. Playoffs are obviously important, but top 4 is the benchmark. You don't spend $10 million on Evander last year, $10 million on a to be determined plus maybe on a to be determined DP striker this year, and then declare victory by getting 7th. That's if you spend that kind of money and you get 7th, you failed.
Yeah.
So top 4.
Definitely. And that's that's what they've talked about. Kamal Miller said that he believes that this team is capable of that, and I think that they are. The question is how it all fits together, how healthy they stay, and then obviously the questions of depth that they possess as well.
And of course, I mean, whether Neville can coach them successfully.
Yeah, that's a big part.
That's I'm not meaning to be a jerk about this, but that's a reasonable question given Neville's resume. He's not been in any place where he got some team to sort of massively overachieve. I think he would probably point to that 1 year in which Miami finished 6th in the East. Again, that's not exactly the It's not like he won a championship.
Yeah, I think he does have a much better roster here than I think he ever did in Miami, to be
I think
completely
that's
fair.
right-ish, but I also think that Miami roster like had the third highest payroll in MLS. Like, I mean, they weren't the Colorado Rapids, right?
Payroll is payroll,
where they're
though.
playing with a third of the deck. Like, it wasn't that good. Yes, there were absolutely roster limitations from the sanctions. I grant that entirely. It's not like the deck though was completely empty, and so, you know, I think it's a reasonable question as to whether he can get this team to overachieve more than he has, or to, you know, be greater than the sum of its parts more than he has his prior teams. And, you know, I'm sure the Timbers will chafe at that point a little bit. But I mean, like, just it's just sort of a reasonable point based on the facts of the past.
Sure.
And so it's a reasonable question. I'm not saying he can't or won't, but it's a question.
Another question that we got was, what Thorns player do we think will have a breakout year? I think we touched on this a little bit in the discussion about Moultrie. I think Moultrie is the one that's probably poised to have.
And Reyna.
Yeah, and Reyna. Moultrie and Reyna, I think, just given their age and newfound roles, are the two people that are poised to, I think, have a really strong year. I think Reyna is going to have a handful of assists and maybe score a goal or two here and there. She had a couple of header goals, I think, last year, and proved a force in that type of situation, which is fun. She's capable of scoring goals, so that'll be cool. And then Moultrie, she's got like potential for like world class, you know, ability. I mean, some of the free kicks she took, some of the balls that she put in last year, they're the jaw droppers. They're like, whoa, like she's her, you know. So I think those two are definitely the most likely. Any spoilers on some guest appearances coming up? We would have liked to have a guest on the podcast this week. I'll be honest. I asked the Timbers about having Phil Neville on as a guest. The Timbers declined our request to have Phil Neville on this podcast. I have reached out on multiple occasions to the Thorns about Lisa Bethal-Mirage being on the podcast as a guest. They have not replied yet. Obviously, those invitations remain standing. There's no hard feelings on our part. We are happy to have any and everybody from the PTFC universe on this podcast, but that's sort of where we are at right now. And as the season goes along, obviously we're going to have folks on and continue to try and build out that guest list. Have some voices other than mine and Mr. Chris Rifer's on this pod. It'll be good to mix some folks in. So
we are, you know, as the folks on YouTube will see, better together. Better together. The welcome mat seriously is very much out. For any of those folks, would love to have them. Definitely.
The other story that came out of this week, and this was part of the list of questions that folks had, was the civil lawsuit against Andy Polo, in which Genesis Alarcon, his former partner, was awarded $600,000 by a jury. That's a very big deal. Obviously, there was an MLS investigation that essentially concluded that the Timbers did not engage in a cover-up, but fined them $25,000 for not properly reporting it to the league. We don't obviously know all of the behind-the-scenes details, but what we do know, obviously, about that situation, which happened about almost 2 years ago at this point, when they let him go, was that they were aware of the sort of incident that they sent Jim McCausland and another staffer out to in the Polo household, and they did end up re-signing him. He was on the roster, and until that incident became public, they kept him there. And Gavin Wilkinson, when he came on this podcast back around that time, said you know, it was with the intent to eventually trade him. Whether or not that's true, who knows? But what we do know is that this civil case is one that found Polo liable for assault and battery against his former partner and the mother of his kids. The question now is how that would potentially be served to Andy Polo, because Andy Polo is currently playing professionally down in Peru. For Universitario de Deportes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he is with the Peruvian national team, and so they do have games in the United States this year. The question is, will he accompany the team to those games? Because if he sets foot on U.S. soil, there is opportunity for them to sort of serve that lawsuit against him, and $600K. I mean, that's a major award. It brings back, of course, the feelings and the thoughts from fans, not just online but in real life, about how that situation was handled, and what would happen in a similar situation in the future with this club, and with the exception, it was mishandled, and the exception of Gavin Wilkinson being gone. Like, it's the leadership at the club is essentially the same at this point. So if they are faced with this situation in the future, obviously the hope on the part of everybody, not just fans, is that it's handled properly, swiftly, and with the victims in mind. But given the previous track record, obviously there are people in the community who don't trust that something like that would be handled properly.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I don't think there's been much question about this for a while. There's certainly no question about it now. It was mishandled. The Timbers didn't respond appropriately to it. Period. I don't know that that's even a disputed point anymore. But as you said, the question is whether they are now in a better position to handle things like that properly, because it's not like that was a completely out of the realm of possibility situation that could never recur. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. My view is they haven't done enough to show people, at least, that they're in a better position to handle these kinds of situations in the future. But that doesn't necessarily go to whether they are in fact or not. And I think the questions that people have about them and about whether sort of accountability has been had are fair questions and are reasonable questions that folks can have in perfectly good faith. I think the Timbers are going to be under the weight of those questions until they demonstrate to people that they are better arranged and better suited to handle these sorts of difficult situations better, in the future.
Yeah. And
that's just where it sort of stands.
Yeah, that is where it stands. And I think that hinges a lot from the perspective of people in the soccer community, from people who are members of the Timbers Army, the 107ist, the most passionate fans among the people in the soccer community, is what does that communication look like? What do they say? And what do they do? I believe that, back when Heather Davis was hired, she said essentially, watch what we do. And so, if that type of situation pops up in the future, people will be watching that and seeing sort of how the organization responds to these type of issues, to this type of criticism. Should less significant issues pop up, then obviously a very serious situation of alleged domestic violence, how women are treated, how the soccer community in general is treated, and frankly how the organization chooses to connect to that community, are all big questions that will need to be answered regardless of what's happening on the field for the Timbers in the coming years, because they're fully lopped off essentially from the Thorns now, right? Obviously there is still the interconnected relationship between the two clubs. The Thorns rely on Providence Park to continue to train this season and then to play their games as well. But Merritt Paulson and Heather Davis and the PTFC front office are now charting their sort of own course, and what that looks like, and inevitably how that compares to how things progress with the Bethals and their ownership and approach to community building with the Thorns, is going to be examined in the coming years, and is going to be, I think, something interesting to look at.
And all of that is why, when you say watch what we do, not what we say, and they, in light of this mishandling of a very serious situation with Andy Polo, They go hire Phil Neville, who, and this is not to cancel or to condemn him, it's just to state the fact that in, 2011, he made a joke on Twitter about domestic violence. Like, why people can very reasonably and in good faith say that doesn't demonstrate to me that you are in a better stead to handle these sorts of serious situations. And it's perfectly possible that Neville, as he has said he has learned from that situation and does take them more seriously than he did in 2011.
Yeah, and that he could even be somebody that plays a central role in them properly addressing that. It is not by any means out of the window.
That's totally possible.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, when you have these sorts of errors in your past, making a move like hiring Phil Neville, sort of with his particular history on this, is just going to give rise to questions, and those questions are fair.
We will obviously continue to keep an eye on all of those issues, in addition to obviously the soccer, which is coming up very soon for the Portland Timbers. Obviously, next week is the season opener against Colorado. That will get things rolling. It's kind of crazy that it just came up out of nowhere here. The 24th of February is when that game is at 7:30 p.m. kickover at Providence Park. MLS season pass required to watch that one. I'm not covering the team anymore, but I've still got MLS season pass, so I'll be watching that one. I'll be there, remotely,
virtually from the couch,
from my couch. but yeah, I'll be watching. I'm looking forward to that, and it's an interesting time for both clubs right now, and one that obviously this next month is going to be a little more focused on the Timbers, just because they'll be playing real games. But no shortage, I think, of narratives and discussion points on the Thorns front.
Never.
Excited to talk about both throughout this season. Podcast, obviously, as folks may already be aware, is still going to keep rolling, even though I am not on the day-to-day beat. I'm keeping up with this stuff, and the Oregonian will continue to cover the Timbers and Thorns. Right now, that's obviously still a question as to how we plan to handle that, but all will be made clearer in the coming weeks as folks continue to tune in and read and everything else as the season gets going. So that'll wrap it for us on Soccer Made in Portland. For Chris Rifer, I'm Ryan Clarke. Thanks for joining us, y'all, and follow us on Twitter at Soccer Made in PDX, at Chris Rifer, at Ryan T. Clarke. Like us, subscribe to us, leave a review. All of the podcasts for the Oregonian can be found through the Oregonian Sports page on the podcasts app, if you have Apple, and then through Spotify as well. On basically all of them are streaming through there now. So that's an important note for folks who may be wondering where they can find this podcast. Find Ducks Confidential, which I am also co-hosting with James Krepia.
Just a real podcaster these days.
I'm a pod boy. What can I say? The Podfather, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, maybe we'll reel that one back in. But thanks y'all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.